instead of a Friday. A lot of you were coming back from IBS out in Vegas, so we decided to move it to today. And I think we may be moving next week's meeting to Monday as well, Jim. I'm not sure if that's been confirmed.
Yeah,
Because
I think given Central's events over the weekend, the fact that a lot of folks that are typically joining us on Fridays would otherwise probably be helping with that event would probably make sense to move to Monday.
yeah, okay. So if everyone wants to put that in their schedule, we'll do the same time a week from today for our next meeting. And Jim, I'll let you and Kevin get started on what's going on, what happened in the last week, and what bills we need to look at. And again, like we did last time, I think if you skip over the ones that we already know where our position is, and we don't need to discuss, but we've got a couple of them that probably need a lot of feedback from their members to figure out where we're going with them. So
Yeah.
focus on those, and I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Bob. So, before we do get into the bills, just a quick recap from last week. I left our convention a day earlier than I anticipated to be back here on Thursday. And on Thursday it was a big day for us. We had started off the morning with a press conference with that included Bob and I, the Speaker of the House, the Majority Leader, Chairman Doucette from the Banks Committee, the ranking member of the Banks Committee, and the representatives from the banking industry and the real estate industry to talk in support of the Build or the Homes for Connecticut program that is basically loosely based off of the Build for Connecticut program that would basically offer low interest loans and the backing of the full faith and credit of the state to offer those low interest loans for builders to build starter homes in the state of Connecticut. And so, and that would include small single family detached townhomes, condos, all for sale. And so there's a lot of work to be done on the bill, but we do think the framework is there, and we're excited to see how it develops moving forward. So we'll update folks on that as things progress. So later that day, Bob and I testified together on said bill, the Homes for Connecticut bill, and we also testified together on the ratio bill. So I don't think I need to explain what the journeyman to apprenticeship ratio, hiring ratio reform bill is. We've talked about it ad nauseum in the past couple of meetings, but that event was spectacular to be part of, and I think Bob will concur. Usually when you're going up against the unions on any particular issue, that the unions will flood the hearing room with members. And this time around, the open shop folks flooded the room with their members. In fact, leaving little to no room for any union folks to actually even be in the hearing room. Much to their chagrin and frustration, they actually wanted a spillover room to where their members could sit, and because of the busyness of the day, the legislature couldn't even accommodate that for them. So they were left outside of the room and very frustrated as a result. And the testimony that was provided that day was vastly, overwhelmingly in support of a ratio reform. And just the very next day, the Commerce Committee met, and the sole bill for them to consider was the ratio bill, and it was a vote to draft. And that vote went well. There were a couple of folks who are adamant union supporters that voted against drafting the bill, but I think it was a 12-4 majority, if I recall correctly, or maybe 12-3. But anyhow, there's a lot more work to be done. A lot of the folks who voted in support of the bill qualified their statements by saying that they want to see, everybody at the table, and they want to see, a piece of legislation that is supported potentially by everybody. I don't know how they get there, quite frankly. I think the legislature really needs to have a profile and courage on this one, because not everybody is going to be happy one way or the other. Whether there's ratio reform or not, somebody's going to get upset. So, any questions about those topics?
Hey, it's just ironic that, in the digital age of virtual meetings, it comes down to how many bodies you can fit in a hearing room.
It's all about aesthetics, so, and I think the open shop folks who we've been coalescing with, we're cognizant of the fact that historically the unions are the ones that always have the show of force, and they wanted to flip the script this time around, and they planned accordingly, and it was beautiful. There are actually parents there testifying on behalf of their children who are apprentices. There are
Wow.
young adults there testifying as apprentices, saying that they want this to happen. And so it was just a great day with a lot of enthusiasm. So Bob, I don't know if you want to comment on that at all.
No, not really. It was just an exciting day, and this committee does not normally see a lot of public hearings, so I think they were a little bit shocked by the outpouring of support. And I don't think the unions have any leg to stand on, quite honestly. That doesn't mean they're not going to pull some political strings along the way, but right now I feel pretty good about what we did for showing there, and a lot of other organizations. It wasn't just all us.
Yeah, I know. I should be clear that this coalition that we built over the summer includes the HBRA, the CBIA, the National Federation of Independent Businesses, the Independent Electrical Contractors, the Connecticut Heating and Cooling Association, as well as others. So it was definitely a concerted effort, and it came out really well that day. So it puts us in a good position moving forward. We know that the bill probably isn't going to look like what it looks like now, so we're now kind of strategizing about how we make sure that we remain in the room, and that the unions don't kind of block us in every direction. So the unions are really good at throwing deception out there, to kind of misinforming folks, and then on top of it, fear mongering, and ultimately bullying, right? So they're the only interest group out there that can literally walk up to a legislator and give them half truths, and then turn around and say, if you don't vote in our way, we're going to do everything we can to vote you out of your seat, right? So if we tried doing that, we would get a much different result than they do, but they do that on a regular basis, and it's worked really well for them to date. I assume there's going to be some strong arming on their part, and we're just going to have to figure out ways to navigate that and get around it.
Jim, do we have data on what other states have as far as ratios?
Yeah, we do and we don't, Chris. Like it's kind of apples and oranges. So, a lot of states have on the job site ratios. Not every state has hiring ratios, and so, and beyond that, some states will bifurcate their ratios based on residential versus commercial, and then there'll be different ratios, whether it's plumbing, electrical, or sheet metal, etc. So, and then there are some states that don't have licensing at all, and therefore no ratios at all. So it's really hard to give, legislative officials a clear understanding of of that sort of comparison. The comparison is really hard to come by. We've asked NHB for that data. They've come back with a goose egg. I know that the local trades are kind of trying to get that data into a framework that is easily digestible. But they're still working on that.
Yeah,
I would
anything
say
we
though
do
that,
just
to be fair,
embarrass
we're
them.
probably the most restrictive of all the surrounding states.
Right, and we probably have the oldest labor force.
Right.
So we should just embarrass them in any way we can.
Yeah, and if you saw the testimony, a lot of it revolves around the fact that we have an aging workforce, that in fact there are 1,200 less electricians registered today than there were 20 years ago. And there was a lot of good information out there, despite the fact that you really can't compare ratios, apples to apples. All right, so let's start going through the bills. I think we can do this in about with an hour, maybe less. So there are a lot of bills today that are being heard, and I submit testimony on a bunch of environmental bills, and well, I'll just go through them because I think they're important for you guys to hear about. House Bill 5004, that's really kind of like this year's iteration of the Green Monster bill from previous years. It's a 58-page bill. It basically establishes the greenhouse gas reduction goals, basically saying that state agencies would have to adhere to zero carbon electricity by 2030, and then the rest of us would have to do it by 2050. It basically, creates this regime of greenhouse gas reporting, and basically allows the deep to run amok. And then there's a study that Pura is required to do to review the natural gas transition. And it goes on to require that the DECD give consideration to its grants to entities and projects that consider the climate change issue. And then it gives preferential treatments to B Corps that are focused on environmental issues. It creates a council to advise on the workforce and economic strategies related to climate change and clean energy, and how to transition workers from the fossil fuel economy to the clean energy economy. And it creates a energy efficiency requirements for school construction, and it also and this is where we kind of geared our testimony to. It creates new energy efficiency standards for appliances and buildings. It basically by saying that that basically appliances now as a minimum have to be Energy Star rated. And that includes like appliances, HVAC systems, lighting. And then it gives the deep kind of carte blanche to be able to add whatever it wants to that list of appliances that need to follow stricter energy efficiency standards. So testimony here was already submitted, basically said, we oppose all the sections pertaining to the transitioning of the, to a fossil-free economy, basically saying that we're in the middle of a energy crisis and that, we shouldn't be taking options away from consumers. And lastly, we asked that the sections pertaining to the energy efficiency standards of appliances be eliminated. Again, because we're talking about Energy Star being a maximum standard, not a minimum standard, and we didn't like the idea of again giving deep carte blanche to change things as it saw fit. So, any questions on that?
So Jim, not a question, but a comment. Did you dive into the end game of this, how it would be implemented? And what I mean by that, is right now with one statewide code, we have an appeals board, right? CNS committee. You've got the state building inspector's office that's really up to date with what's going on between the building, the existing building, the IBC, the IRC. You go and create the stretch code, right? And certain towns are in it, certain towns aren't. Who's going to be the appeals board for that? Who's going to police what it is? The local building officials can't keep up with the codes as they are now. So how are they going to appeal that? How are they going to prove that they're doing it?
Yeah.
Who's
So-
going to be there to make sure it's getting done or not getting done?
Yeah, so I mean, this bill actually doesn't include the stretch code provisions. That's another bill. But to your point, with the testimony provided on this bill, I threw 3 or 4 different pieces of testimony into one piece of testimony for this committee. I kept it relatively general, just in the interest of time. But the reality is, the real work is going to be done after this bill gets its public hearing, and Kevin and I and others start drilling down into things and really engaging the chairs at that point in time.
Jim, did it get into a pairing electric capacity bill? Because we don't have the grid to handle any of it.
You're asking if my testimony included?
Well, I don't know. I mean, we all know you can't do that because it would take so much electricity. We'd have to triple our electric rates every year for the next 6 years.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, it really was broad, saying that we just generally, oppose any sort of electrification, of construction, and that, we have concerns about the economic impacts to builders and to homeowners and to the economy at large. But again, there'll be plenty of time to add detailed commentary, to connect with the committee members, to create calls to action from our members to key committee members, and really kind of drive the bus from there. In the past, we've actually been asked to the table by Rick Lopes and others on this bill because of our opposition to it. My guess is we'll be having those kind of closed door discussions with them at a later date as well on this bill. So Senate Bill 9, which we also opposed, basically sections 1 through 5 require like flood insurance disclosures for home buyers and renters. Section 8 limits the state funding for construction, for residential construction in a flood-prone area. Section 6 and 7 would require or give, basically it's a coastal site plan review, which expands state oversight over coastal construction. Removes the exemption of single-family homes in certain coastal areas, requiring them to go through additional review. Basically, the coastal site plans for shoreline flood and erosion control structures would also be state agency reviews, or include state agency reviews. And sections 9 through 15 of the bill pertain to municipal and regional climate planning requirements, basically saying that the municipal plans must now address climate risks like flooding, heat waves, infrastructure resilience. It requires geospatial mapping of critical infrastructure, changes zoning regulations to incorporate climate adaptation measures, and then there are zoning and development changes. It basically encourages, hold on one second, higher density and mixed use development, allows for ADUs in more areas, and permits municipalities to create resiliency improvement districts with funding for climate adaptation projects. Then strengthens flood risk considerations and zoning regulations. So, basically, the concern that we had here and that we expressed in testimony was this additional bureaucracy for site plan approvals in coastal areas. Our argument was that the municipalities already do this, and therefore, having deep do it is redundant and would simply cause delays and additional costs that we're not interested in seeing. So we asked them to to strip that from the legislation. So I'll skip over. We're just going to monitor Senate Bill 732, an act requiring the state water plan to be amended to address climate change. That bill really requires that climate change be integrated into the state water planning process. And so it basically says that the Water Planning Council needs to revise how it plans to incorporate regional climate adaptation strategies, and recommend technical and infrastructure upgrades, promote inter-regional sharing of water sources, and encourage municipal conservation ordinances. The next bill is Senate Bill 1245, which we submitted testimony in opposition to already. This bill basically, has regulations and funding restrictions for flood-prone areas. Sections 1 through 5 are pertain to flood insurance disclosure requirements. Basically requires home buyers and renters and mortgage applicants to be notified if basically that the standard homeowners insurance doesn't require flood or doesn't include flood, and that and they need to be informed of that. Mandates that flood disclosure notices are provided with home sales and rental agreements. And section 2 of the bill, or section 8 of the bill, basically pertains to development restrictions and flood zones. So basically it says that it prohibits state funds from being used to subsidize construction of new homes or major renovations in FEMA designated floodways, or in instances where there have been properties with repetitive losses. And it basically will only allow for reconstruction in instances where the home is brought into FEMA compliance. So sections 6 through 7 of the bill expands the role of DEEP in reviewing development projects near tidal wetlands, beaches, and dunes. And then sections 9 through 13 require towns to incorporate the climate change mitigation, flooding risks, and resiliency planning into their local zoning and land use regs. And it expands state oversight over municipal hazard mitigation plans. So we once again submitted testimony in opposition to that bill. I think broadly our concerns were about DEEP interjecting itself into planning processes and approval processes, and so we asked that bill be rejected. And then there was House Bill 6868, which we also submitted testimony in opposition to, stating that we oppose it unless amended. The key sections of this bill were section 1, which actually, this bill actually had some good stuff in it. There's the permit extension reform provisions in section 1, basically allowing DEEP to extend general permits indefinitely until a new permit is issued or a determination is made not to renew the permit. This is opposed to what's currently in statute, which is a 12-month expiration limit. And basically on top of it, though, if it allows DEEP to come up with new registration fees for extended permits. So remains to be seen what those would look like. Section 2 pertaining to watershed and watershed level compensatory mitigation requirements basically says that DEEP can require permit applicants to fund or participate in watershed mitigation projects for activities impacting wetlands and watercourses and coastal waters or tidal wetlands. Obviously, we objected to this provision. Developers would potentially need to purchase resource credits or participate in the mitigation projects to offset environmental impacts, and that the mitigation projects that they would be required to do would have to provide a substantial public benefit and be held in perpetuity by a third party. So, and the remainder of the bill was how the DEEP reviews the endangered species permitting. It would require DEEP to conduct a study on improving endangered species review processes under the Natural Diversity Database. Chris, I'm sure you'd appreciate that one, right? The study would include ways to make the review process more transparent and efficient, and it would require DEEP to look at comparisons with endangered species regs in other states, and then it would allow them to consult with third-party consultants on their roles in the mitigation planning process. So obviously that's good stuff. Lastly, the bill in section 4 changes the public hearing process for environmental permits. It limits the circumstances under which DEEP must hold full public hearings. It basically says that public hearings would be informational only unless the petition includes specific allegations of environmental harm. And then it basically says that DEEP would only have to, basically says that DEEP still has to respond to public comments, but only through informal processes, like it can respond to emails at some point, but it doesn't need to do it in the formal hearing process. So, we obviously had concerns about the mitigation projects and the requirement that folks be engaged in these mitigation project requirements. So, we opposed that and said that if they stripped that out, we would like the rest of the bill. So, Bob, I don't know, do we want to talk about the Transfer Act and, the sunsetting of the Transfer Act? Right now, I'm still waiting to hear from the realtors, to get some intel from them. They said they'd give me some talking points about the Transfer Act and the changes. They've actually had like a third-party attorney kind of review everything, and they're still waiting for that information. Just so folks know, there are a number of bills that are having a joint public hearing tomorrow with the Environment Committee and the Commerce Committee. We were asked by the Deputy Commissioner of DECD to kind of use those bills as an opportunity to talk about the draft regulations that are out there right now that in essence would sunset the Transfer Act and replace it with a release-based cleanup program, which we believe all in all will be beneficial to development and building. But we want to kind of get into the details of it a little bit. There are some concerns that I've heard secondhand about the regs that would potentially draw residential properties into the conversation, when in the past, you know, the Transfer Act was strictly
Yes, it's me.
pertaining to commercial. And it sounds like, was there a question? Oh no, it sounds, but anyhow, I think we're still waiting on more information to be able to weigh in a manner that would be appropriate. But Bob, I don't know if you have any comments.
No, I think that's enough. If anybody has specific questions, reach out to Jim, or comments if you guys work in that arena. It's very specialized, and I don't have enough knowledge of it to really make good judgments. So we're looking for either lawyers or environmentalists or environmental professionals, the licensed engineers that work in that field. It's supposedly going to improve the process, but I don't know all the ins and outs and nuts and bolts of it. So if you guys do any of that, reach out to Jim, and if you have any comments about it, please let us know your thoughts.
At a 30,000-foot level, the release based is miles ahead of the old Transfer Act. I think that's sort of all we need to know for now. I mean, the lawyers in the commissioner's office have been haggling over the details now for 5 years. Well,
Right.
let's make the improvement and move on. And you're not going to solve everything on a highly technical bill, but it's much better.
Yeah, I think the
We know the
realtors are just
existing system
concerned
doesn't
that-
work.
yeah. I think the realtors are just concerned that the deep might be trying to sneak in extra oversight, particularly with residential properties where it could actually result in a little bit more bureaucracy than they'd like.
Oh,
So
come on. Deep would never do such a
Right,
thing.
right,
Really?
right.
Come on.
Right.
Yeah. So, you know, as we get more information, I don't necessarily feel comfortable submitting testimony right at this very moment on these, and I can always just let Matt know that, you know, we haven't been intimately involved in the negotiation process, and that we just need more information before we weigh in. And it's okay to, obviously, we can submit testimony after the fact as well. So the next bill is in public safety, and this is the stretch code bill. You know, beyond allowing for towns to adopt stretch codes.
Jim, did you want to jump over the commerce?
Oh, did I
Aaron?
jump over the bill?
1397?
Yeah, I mean, all those are all
1397 and 1401, are those part of the same environmental things?
well, 1404, 1397, and 1401 are all part of, they're all Transfer Act related.
Okay, that's all involved the same thing. Got it. Okay, I just want to make sure we didn't miss any.
No. So the next bill again is House Bill 7119, and this is the stretch code bill. Beyond the stretch code, it does do a couple other things which I'd love to get input on. It would require that new residential buildings of 6 stories or more with fewer than 25 dwelling units to install elevators that are large enough to accommodate 2 people, including one with a wheelchair. And then it would also change elevator inspections for congregate housing from every 18 months to every 12 months. So for those who own buildings in their apartments with you know, elevators, are there concerns about increased inspections? It obviously shortens it, you know, shortens it by 6 months. Then obviously, are there any concerns about the 6 stories and 25 units capacity for elevators being a minimum?
Just
So
to
Jim,
clarify,
I get mine inspected every 6 months. So and by my contractor. So you know, on my own. So I don't see a huge, I mean, we probably don't have any members building buildings that size anyway, but and as far as the 6 floors, I mean, if you don't put an elevator in 6 floors, I don't know.
I agree with Eric, and I sent you, like I said, I'm not well versed in the IBC, but I sent you the elevator language that requires it for 4 stories or more, and there's some exceptions in there. I just don't see the likelihood of doing that. That said, I pulled out our correspondence and just set the meat of the bill to Amaris at the State Building Inspector's office. Because anytime you send me anything that's code related, I flag it for her to put on her list. And I know in the past, things like that, DAS will not necessarily put public comment, but through their channels, we'll have conversations behind the scenes of, don't do this. We already have a code process, because a lot of times these things come up, people don't understand the technical part of this. So sometimes it's just, they're not even understanding the concept. They don't even know what they're asking for. So that's all been relayed. I sent that about an hour ago.
Great. So, just so folks know, people are starting to submit testimony on this bill already. And there are more people in support of stretch codes than there are people opposing it. I think Bob and I are the only ones to date from our association that have submitted testimony in opposition to this bill. I would just encourage folks on this call, if you have a couple of minutes, to just submit some real quick testimony in opposition. Even if you guys submit a 1-sentence letter opposing it with your names and addresses and places of business, it would be really helpful, because right now I'm a little nervous that we haven't really had a response to this call to action.
This is HB 7119.
Yeah, and if you guys got the reminder from me today, if you just scroll down there, it shows you how to testify or submit testimony, and it even gives you a sample template that I wrote for you, where you guys can just add your names to it and submit it.
Yeah,
It's
Jim,
weird that the name.
I actually submitted testimony about an hour ago.
Okay, yeah,
Using your template, modified your template
great.
in opposition to 7119, just focusing on the impact on financing and economic feasibility, given all the increases in inflation in materials and energy costs and insurance premiums and on and on and on.
That's
It's
great.
weird that it doesn't mention that it's related to stretch codes. It sounds like it's about elevators or fire safety.
Yeah, well, I mean, it refers to state building code, right? Yeah, so
I know, but it's like, that was a big one before. Now they're trying to disguise it.
well, and it's never been in public safety before. We've been able to successfully kill it in the Environment Committee and the Energy and Technology Committee, and now they're trying their luck with the Public Safety Committee, which I think is interesting.
So Jim, I made the point about the appeals, and I'll dive into that in my testimony. I'll keep it narrow from like the way it works, et cetera. Obviously, headliner will be I oppose it. There was one other thing. So I think that people should also drill into, and I'll mention this statutorily, that Connecticut has to pass the codes within 18 months of them being printed. So we are the most up-to-date in codes in the entire country. Last code cycle, we were before California on implementing our codes with our process. With the delays of the release of the stuff, I don't know if we will be this time around for the 24, which is now 2026 building code. But I can't imagine that California didn't run into the same thing. So we are at the forefront of this already. Adding another layer, not sure what that's going to happen. So if people need more details, if they're filling something, you got my phone number, call me. But it's a little over the top.
Great.
Little.
And if anyone's interested in testifying, I think you have until 6 o'clock this evening to sign up. But I'll certainly be testifying. And I actually got so eager. If you'll see the testimony page, I've submitted my testimony twice on this. So it showed up.
All
twice.
right, good job.
Hey, Jim, do you have to be there in person or
No,
video?
No, you can sign up to testify virtually as well. All right, so off to the housing bills. There's Housing Bill 1340, an act permitting a tenant to file a complaint with a fair rent commission within 30 days of signing a new lease. this does exactly what the title says it does. I just didn't know if our landlords out there care. So again, it just would allow any sort of tenant who signs a lease to within 30 days of signing it to go ahead to the Fair Rent Commission and complain about it.
Jim, this
Jim,
is
can you
awful.
explain what is there something that's stopping people from doing it now? Or is there an end game that they're gonna be setting people up and getting them to sign leases and then having a way to get after developers?
Well, it's a good
Sure.
question, and I hear Lauren wanting to chime in, so I'm going to let her talk first.
So what they're doing is they're trying to screw landlords even more and expand their overreach of fair rent commissions. So this is a Rafi, I can't say his last name, Podolsky. How do you say his last name, Jim?
Podolsky.
Podolsky. So this is him trying to expand the power of fair rent commissions. It basically makes a lease contract worth nothing. Why would you sign a lease at a new rate? Or why would we want people to sign leases and then have 30 days after they sign it? You think that you have everything settled and then they can go and complain about it and say it was unfair and unconscionable. They have 45, we have to give them 45 days notice with their new renewal rate. That should be enough time for them to bring a complaint to the Fair Rent Commission. They know they have the opportunity to leave. They know they have the opportunity to negotiate the new rent with the landlord directly. And then if those things don't work, they could go before they sign the lease to the Fair Rent Commission. This is ridiculous. Like there's no point in having a lease if it's going to be argued after the fact.
Yeah, and you'd be arguing after the fact and after a new tenant moved into your property. So what legs do you have at that point?
I concur with that, Lauren, just so you know that that's another tool for the tenant just to kick that date, keep moving that date further and further out without paying rent.
I think this is part of a very long-term strategy to overflow the FRCs so they can get rent control passed in Connecticut.
I mean, Chris had a good point. What's stopping an individual from going now to the Fair Rent Commission after they've signed a lease? I think it almost seems like this simply affirms what could already be done, but
Does it establish a statute of limitation on the complaint?
I mean, it literally just adds to the section to section 7-148C, and it may file with the Fair Rent Commission under this chapter regarding a proposed rental charge increase either prior to signing a new or an amended rental agreement containing such increase or not later than 30 days after signing such rental agreement. That's the entire language. So it just seems odd to me that there's nothing like it's not crossing anything out or it's just adding. So I just think.
But Jim, Lauren's point is now they signed a lease, they move in, and then they decide they don't like the rate they negotiated with you. And now we can go to the Fair Rent Commission and let them decide if it's a fair rent or not. And they're already in your property. So I don't know what happens when they go, yeah, you're right. You got to reduce the rent, or they get to stay. Then they're not going to leave. They're going to pay you the lower amount, or they're just not going to leave, and you get to evict them and spend 6 months.
This is so far beyond a 3-day right of rescission or something like this. This can't happen. I mean, it's ridiculous. You can't just have a right to appeal that's this blatant. I mean, it's the first time hearing about it, Lauren, but I think you're absolutely right. You guys must be going crazy in your group.
Well, this and the 1 month security cap. I mean, there are a lot of really bad things. Lapse of time, the 1 month security cap, and this.
Criminal background checks too, right? Yeah.
Background checks.
But All right, so I'm happy to submit testimony in opposition to this. If anyone else feels strongly about it too, it's for a hearing tomorrow. So I can send an email out to folks on how to submit testimony if you're interested.
Yeah, Jim, and I think your testimony can be just as simple as what Lauren said, is that you have, 60 days prior to signing the lease to negotiate or appeal the increase if you're already a tenant. That should give you more than enough time to protect the tenant, and they don't need to do this after the fact. Because if it's 30 days now, why don't we just make it a year? So anytime during the year, if you don't like your rent, you just take it to the Fair Rent Commission. That would make it easier for everybody. Just anytime during the duration of your lease. It's just crazy.
Okay. Is there anything else? All right, moving
Well,
along.
That would
Oh,
just force negotiation after the lease is already signed. It just, and word would spread, and so everybody would sign their lease, and then they would load up the Fair Rent Commission with appeals. And you probably aren't gonna get any money in the meantime. So instead of agreeing that, no, that's too much, I'll move out, they're just gonna sign it and say, oh, I'll fight it later.
I have a feeling that this will be one of those bills that if it ever came out on the Senate floor, Rob Sampson would talk it to, he'd filibuster the hell out of it. Yeah, I just can't see it, allowing this one to slip by. But all right, we'll submit that testimony. The next bill is a task force to study state guaranteed construction bonds. I have here support, but I'm actually going to monitor it simply because it's a task force and not, a piece of legislation that makes any substantive changes. The question, though, that Bob and I had about this, and which isn't entirely clear, is if the bill pertains to, it references the full faith and credit of the state for surety bonds in construction, but it's not clear to us if this bill pertains to, what, say, Homes for Connecticut is trying to do to, decrease interest rates for A&D loans and construction loans, or if this is to protect municipalities in instances where, a builder doesn't live up to his or her obligations. So the language is just sufficiently vague to make me scratch my head, and we'll just keep an eye on it. I'm going to reach out to the chair of housing and just ask what his intentions are behind this bill, just so we can get some clarity, and I'll follow up and let folks know. So the next bill is the newest version of the House Omnibus Housing Bill. This is 7112. Speaking to Jason Rojas, he was really pissed off with how the Housing Committee, put out, it was House Bill 5002, which was the original Housing Omnibus Bill. They put it out as a proposed bill. It didn't have any detail to it, and so he felt like it was appropriate to have this bill go out, with raised bill language in it to actually have a robust public hearing on it. So this bill does a number of things. It requires municipal water pollution control authorities to develop and publish plans for sewer service expansion, prioritizing areas suitable for multi-family housing development. It creates a state grant program to fund sewer system improvements for housing development. It has minimum lot size restrictions, basically saying that no town could require residential lots be greater than 1 acre. It establishes a $50 million bond fund pilot program that would be administered by CHFA to support public housing authorities in expanding missing middle housing, i.e. duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. It modifies Connecticut's HBRACT program, its rental assistance program, to increase flexibility in the voucher values by adjusting them to zip code. Obviously, you know, if someone living in Fairfield County may need more in their RAP funding than somebody living in Northeast Connecticut. So beyond that, it creates a working group to study the feasibility of state-funded real estate investment trusts to acquire and deed restrict affordable housing units. So that's kind of interesting. And ultimately, it also prohibits municipal zoning regulations from capping the number of multifamily units. I believe that was one of Tim's suggestions from the past. Yeah, that's about it in a nutshell. We'll obviously be submitting testimony in general support of this bill. Does anyone have any questions about the bill?
Yeah, this is Tim. You know, as you all know, I labored for months to come up with a long list of stuff, and two items appear to have made the cut. One being the requirement that municipal sewer plans have include planning for sewers to multifamily and affordable housing. So that's good. I almost fell off my chair when I read Section 4, the new Section 11, shall not require a lot size greater than 1 acre for the construction of a residence. So it was good till I got to a residence. I mean, it's good that I guess they're doing an across the board rule for minimum lot sizes. It would be nice if it said something other than a residence, you know, for residential uses, but that's good. And you know, the statewide real estate investment, affordable housing real estate investment trust sounds like a good idea. And so I think we should support this.
What is that? What's the House bill number, Jim? I'm sorry.
Well, 7112.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, we'll be submitting testimony in support. The next bill is 7113, an act permitting municipalities to establish light touch density housing. So it'll be interesting to get your thoughts on this one. This bill's permissive, it's not a mandate. Therefore, I'm not quite sure what incentive any municipality has to actually you know, incorporate this into their zoning. But in essence, it's Section 1 expands the allowable housing types to be used in single family detached zoning to include duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, townhomes, cottage housing, and single family homes on smaller lots. It applies only where sewer and water service is available, and it mandates that the zoning, subdivision, and health and safety standards be objective, measurable, and not more restrictive than those for single family homes. And it prevents municipalities from imposing discretionary subjective reviews. It allows administrative approval for developments for up to 4 units per lot in single family zones without hearings or discretionary review. It prevents municipalities from imposing minimum lot sizes over 5,000 square feet, prevents you know, maximum lot sizes, says floor area ratios, prevents them from being below 150%, prevents building coverage ratios below 50%, height limits below 3 stories, fees beyond those for single family homes, and owner occupancy, affordability, or income restrictions. It does allow the towns to regulate setbacks up to 10 feet from from the front and rear and 5 feet from the side. And it allows towns to regulate off-street parking up to 1 space per unit unless near transit. And then there are no parking requirements within half a mile of rail or transit stops or a quarter mile from bus stops with regular service. So,
Jim, would you think that this actually encourages municipalities to adopt light touch zoning or discourages them? Because this is just putting a bunch of criteria on what they're gonna adopt.
yeah, so this is just saying what light touch density is, right? So, I mean, to me, Bob and I were having the same conversation. So, you know, without it being a mandate or without there being some distinct incentives for municipalities to actually promulgate these type of zoning reforms, why would they do it, right?
But Jim, there's one gigantic problem in this bill. D8, the section of D is the municipal agency shall not adopt objective zoning standards that will have the effect of imposing owner occupancy standards, income limits, or affordability set-aside requirements. That to me says that if you're doing light touch density, it can't be under 830G. You're exempt from 830G.
Well, and you know, obviously well, you're exempt from 830G. Oh,
Well, it says it cannot impose income limits or affordability set-aside requirements in any light touch density, and that you read the breadth of the definition: duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, townhouses, etc. I don't think that that's what they meant, but that's the way it reads. So that's a big problem.
So Tim, I think the intention would be that we want to encourage this kind of stuff, and we don't want them to say, well, good, you can build that, but you have to make 80% of it affordable or something to that effect. But I understand how you're reading it, and it could say that precludes you from using 830G to satisfy the other requirements.
I mean,
How about
technically, if you're
build
looking at
for
a four-family,
CT? That could
looking at-
almost be included in that,
Yeah,
if you read it Tim's way.
right.
So the one question that Jim and I were going back on this over the weekend was the fact that it is permissive. And right now, a town could do any of this stuff without this legislation if they wanted to. I don't know why they'd be motivated to, but they could. So I think what happens is, even though we want to encourage this light touch density proposal, this missing middle kind of conversation, is without putting either some sort of incentives for the towns or mandates, and mandates are going to get really tough because you're going to get the home rule guys that are just going to come out and kill this thing. But unless we do one of those two things, I don't know that there's any town that's really going to be supportive or likely to implement it, even if it gets approved.
well, I mean,
Yeah,
it would
in
increase-
subsection D, everything is great until you get to number 8. Everything else is the kind of change we want to see. But you know, say subsection D is not permissive. It's a prohibition. And then it gets, so it seems to say if anything that would qualify as light touch housing, you can't impose income limits or affordability standards. So it's not something the towns could do on their own. They can't say we're going to have townhouses, but they're exempt from 830G. You can't do that.
So I think
That's what this-
the basis for this legislation, Tim, was AEI's template legislation.
Yeah.
And you know, obviously AEI's position on all this stuff is that the intent of light touch density is to develop you know, naturally occurring affordable housing without you know, requiring deed restrictions, you know, or utilizing you know, like a builder's remedy to make it happen. You know, this should all be done in lieu of subsidies, in lieu of you know, any sort of development of bureaucracy. You know, this is the private sector's answer to building you know, with slightly more density and naturally occurring affordable housing.
Yeah, and
Tim?
so yeah.
Tim, as I read this, and you're the lawyer, but it's saying that a municipal agency shall not adopt objectives that would limit that stuff. It doesn't say anything that an applicant can't come in with an 830G or anything else. It just says the town can't make it part of their zoning standard in this situation, that it has to meet those things.
Yeah, but they cannot impose income limits or affordability on a type of housing.
Well, it's
I-
saying
I-
they can't create standards that would do that. So they're, I, I mean, you take a look at it, but I
Yeah,
think they're
no,
just saying, they're trying to be on our side here, not against the town.
Well,
I agree. I think you and I are articulating the two ways, at least two ways to read this, but why introduce legislation that could be read the other way?
Well,
There ought to be a way to clarify what you just said.
and Tim, just real quick, I feel that the bill helps increase the housing options, right, for economic growth for a lot of cities and municipalities, does it not?
There's a
That's
lot,
the way I felt it read.
yeah, there's a lot in here for us to like. I'm just saying, let's not create a backdoor problem that we didn't anticipate.
Yeah, I think that if there was a con to it, I think the con would be the infrastructure strain. On increased housing density that might strain some of the infrastructure like schools, roads, and public service, but it may be a little bit of an environmental impact. But however, it does increase the housing option and land use. I think there's I feel somewhat of a positive on it. I agree with you're saying about the 830G. We got to decipher that.
Tim, it would be
I-
possible to pull that section out of this paragraph and just have another section that just says, while the towns cannot impose this restriction, an applicant could choose to include those types of
Affordability, yeah.
provisions in their application,
A
something.
variety of affordable programs within their application.
Right. You could take out subsection 8. I'm not even sure you
Possibly,
need to say anything elsewhere about it, but then you have all the incentives that were just referred to, and you're not creating the potential limit.
I think, well, this isn't a required thing anyways, but the reason they put that in there is so a town can't tell you, you can do light touch density as long as you do half of it affordable. And so what that would make it where nobody wanted to do it. They're trying to
Right.
keep it where people want to voluntarily use this approach.
Yeah, you're
And-
right,
and
Chris.
have
That's
market rate
absolutely the
units.
intention.
Yeah, and have market rate units.
But the fact that Tim can read it differently,
Yeah.
we should make
No,
sure
I
that he doesn't
agree.
read it differently.
Might need a clarification, but Jim, I was wondering, do you think this is a two-part thing where, hey, if we can get something for light touch defined and adopted as voluntary, then in the future, we can attach a Build for Connecticut incentive to it or something like that, where we already have a format that we're kind of going into. So this is the first half of a two-step process.
I think we can couch it that way for sure.
Yeah, Chris, you're exactly right. I thought the exact same thing, was that even though this by itself might not create a whole lot of housing, having a mandate well, the mandate is a problem for the towns. If we do incentives, it gets a fiscal note on the bill, and unless they can come up with budget numbers to support it, it doesn't go anywhere when it gets to finance and that sort of thing. So I agree with you. We could get this done. It's probably not by itself a great bill, but if you get that piece done this year, next year you come back with either incentives or a mandate, then maybe we get somewhere with it. Trying to do it all at once, it might just blow up on us.
Yeah, I think it codifies and defines what light touch density is all about. And that puts a new kind of word or term into our statutes.
Jim, did you say the bill was last year's bill? There was another bill very similar to this that sort of does a lot of the same stuff, but still permissive? Or is that different?
Yeah, so the majority leader passed legislation last year, and forgive me, I don't recall the bill number, but it in essence creates defines missing middle, and then it's permissive, but it also, for towns that choose to zone to allow it, they get a 0.25% off towards their moratorium. Right, Tim, do you remember the bill number on that one?
Last year's bill?
Yeah.
No.
No, me neither. But yeah, that's what that did. And I don't see any sort of major clamoring from the municipalities to go and make missing middle zoning changes to take advantage of that quarter point. I don't know if it's it doesn't seem like it's that enticing for the municipalities at the moment.
And one of the things that we tried to do with this bill was require water and sewer, because we were trying to get all those towns that don't have water and sewer sort of off this bill and not having a concern with it because it wouldn't affect them. And we figured that would sort of get our nose under the tent a little bit first.
Yeah. And you know what happens then, though? It's kind of, this is a bit of a catch-22, because you do that and then later on you tie incentives to this bill. Then you're gonna have the Doug Dubitskys of the world saying, you're penalizing my small towns that don't have sewer and water from enjoying any sort of additional discretionary dollars as a result. So it's like damned if you do, damned if you don't. But at the very least, to Bob's point, at least initially, you take the Doug Dubitskys of the world and the folks who represent the cost communities, out of the conversation by saying, don't worry, this doesn't apply to you.
I could see going into a town and saying, well, I'd like to do this, and I won't go the 830G route, but I will do light touch density. Now it's defined, and use it as something that's a tool that we can kind of reference or back into, even if a town hasn't in fact got something like that.
And that may be the one incentive that towns do have, is that they obviously they don't like 830G. They hate the lack of control that they lose under 830G. So if they put in something similar, get similar benefits, but without having to lose all the control of what it looks like, I think that could be a benefit to them. And I've told several towns this, and I'm having this very conversation. Wallingford is trying to do something under last year's legislation, and I wish I knew that bill number. That will sort of give them some of those points that, Tim, I know you hate the fact that they're getting points just for zoning stuff. But that was part of that bill last year, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Towards the 830G 10% amount. But they're looking at that and saying, if this will stop you guys from coming in with 830G applications, even though generally they haven't had bad applications, they just hate the fact that people can do anything they want and they've got really very limited say in it. And they just don't like being in that position. Even though Tim never brings in a bad application under 830G.
Hasn't happened yet. All right. I'm gonna have to jump here. I have to get ready for Thursday night, so.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and submit testimony and support. Maybe we'll give some recommendations for some clarifying language as well.
Thanks for your help, Tim. And
Thank you.
Tim, maybe just to finish this up, could you find that bill from last year and get that out to us?
I will find it, Bob.
Yeah, let's just compare what we had in last year's bill and what benefits does this one get? Or is it really just a duplication of what's already sort of in statute that doesn't really help us a lot?
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So we just have two more bills here. One is House Bill 7114, an act establishing tax credits for the construction of residential units above retail property. It created a tax voucher program for owners that build apartments above existing retail space in the amount equivalent to the lesser of a tax credit of 10% for qualified expenditures or a tax credit that's reserved upon certification of the plan by the commissioner. So whichever is less. And then, which obviously we'll support. And finally is a similar bill, Senate Bill 1263, an act concerning tax credits for the conversion of commercial properties. This would create a tax credit voucher to either the owner converting the commercial building or to the taxpayer named by the owner as contributing to the conversion. The tax credit voucher would be in the amount equivalent to the tax credit reserved, again, upon certification of the conversion plan, or 10% of the actual qualified conversion expenditures. So obviously, it seems like this makes common sense and is a good pro developer bill. So we'll support that as well. And that's it.
Jim, one comment on 7114, that above retail. I don't know if we should just comment, I don't know if you've already submitted testimony on it, but that it should be over any kind of commercial use. So if you're above office space, a lot of times you have mixed use that, it could be retail, but if they're really strictly defining it, you have an office space, you have a real estate office on the first floor and you try to do apartments above it or something, all of a sudden it's not retail. So might want to, I don't know what the exact language is there, but just want to make sure that we're making that as broad as we can.
Okay.
Does mean
Yeah.
different use classifications, and so there's all sorts of building requirements involved in that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yep.
We're all done here, but there was one issue that's been brought up to me recently. There's a bill that's being heard, I think it's tomorrow, in the insurance committee, and it's pertaining to wholesale real estate transactions. For folks that aren't familiar with that, that's where, a third party gets involved in a transaction. They don't take ownership of the property, but they just are kind of like a middleman transacting on behalf of the owner. And they get themselves a nice little finder fee. They don't have to technically disclose to the interested buyer who they are or what their interest is. And from what we just recently had one of these wholesale retailer or wholesale real estate guys join our association, and has brought to our attention his concern with some legislation out there that would require them to disclose their interests in the activity, in the transaction, and then there's also some Class C misdemeanor scenarios for them not being in compliance with the legislation. So I had a brief conversation with this gentleman who is just joining our association, and he said that there are a lot of scenarios where he's working, whether it's on undeveloped land, or somebody buys an investment property and gets in over their skis and needs to offload it, that it can be a less expensive process to go through one of these wholesalers because there aren't those additional real estate transaction fees or points being taken by realtors. And so that this could be an option that potentially builders, remodelers, and developers could use, that is potentially being restricted. And they were making a push for us to submit testimony in opposition. Obviously, I'm sure I don't know if we have any of our real estate friends on today, but they have a lot of reason on their end to be pursuing legislation like this. So I feel like I need to walk a tightrope here, but I'm not quite sure what that tightrope is.
So Jim, tell me, what's the opposition to this? Why are they trying to restrict this from happening?
Because it's kind of like the Wild West right now, from what I understand. There's a very little regulation for these wholesale real estate transactions. And the reality is while they don't make up a huge percentage of transactions in the state of Connecticut, you are cutting into the realtor community's, nut, really, if you will. So, that there is, I imagine, some reluctance on the part of the real estate community to allow for this sort of transaction to proliferate.
Hey, your speaker's off. Still off for some reason.
You're
Sorry
still
about
muted.
that.
There you go.
If I could just add to that, just in a quick little scenario, if somebody finds out about this one home, let's just say it's a single family home, and a wholesaler approaches that individual and gives him a very good sales pitch in reference to, hey, I can give you 110,000 or 115,000 or 150,000 for your home, and they sign a contract with that homeowner, and then turn around and sell that piece of paper to an investor, for 170 or 200,000, they make a quick 30, 40, or 50,000. That's basically what this wholesaling thing is doing. But what's happening is the actual homeowner doesn't realize the value of their property, and a wholesaler's coming in there and undercutting them and selling that paperwork to somebody else. So really, who's getting screwed on here is the actual homeowner. At that point, and that's that I see this a lot as a realtor as well, and then we come in later on and like, gosh, I don't, your house was actually valued somewhere at 200,000. I'm just using round numbers here, and they left $50,000 on the table, or gave it to somebody else essentially because they weren't, I want to say they were taken advantage of. A lot of elderly folks might be in that situation, or people that are inheriting property out of state might be in that situation. That's one of the drawbacks to this wholesale thing. So maybe disclosing it is not a bad idea.
Mm-hmm.
It's
You know what
probably
I'm saying?
difficult if you're one of those guys, we buy houses and you go make a deal with somebody. If you then subsequently to buying the first house or making the deal, then go find a buyer from it, they can't disclose something that hasn't even happened yet. So it's kind of difficult, but I agree. I mean,
Yeah.
the way the system's set up now is it helps homeowners get the value of whatever their home is, because they're going to find a realtor that's going to compete for it. Unless that industry gets bigger and you got 6 guys that want to bid for your house on the wholesale level.
And it truly is a sheet of paper. I've seen it happen, where it's on that one document. There's no delineation of what's transpired there, just a purchase and sales contract, and they actually sell that piece of paper to the investor, and then the investor actually winds up closing, and then at the closing, the middleman gets the check through the attorney. It's all just it's definitely on the up and up, but the person that really doesn't understand what's going on is the actual seller.
Yeah, I mean, it's I from what I understand, that predominantly the end user is, like you said, 9 times out of 10 an investor, someone who's a builder, a developer, a remodeler who's looking to fix and flip. Folks, Airbnb folks, landlords, that sort of thing. So, I mean, do we want to be? I don't know. Do we want to be part of that scenario where we're, benefiting from someone else's lack of information or
Jim, maybe it's
Greg.
something that we could actually encourage them to come up with some type of disclosure, just that, our advantages are we can close right away. We can take care of this for you. However, make sure that you feel comfortable with the numbers before you ultimately sign. And if that's right in the document, then it does sort of even the playing field.
Of course.
Because I think there is a need for this out there, but I just think that it shouldn't be also sweeping in the unaware.
Right. And the reality is, and I don't know what the percentages are, but not everybody is a bumbling homeowner just trying to get rid of their property. There are people who are investors in a property that just might have got in over their head, that really want to unload quickly, right? And so you know, I could see how a wholesaler would be valuable or helpful in that scenario. But so I wouldn't want to see
I've
you know,
also,
option go away indefinitely, right? But maybe, you know, instead of this being the Wild West, there are parameters put in place, particularly for folks who could, you know,
Great.
be taken advantage of.
Yeah, this was-
we watched this case happen to us where somebody swooped in and the people had Alzheimer's, both husband and wife, and it was a large piece of property. And there was just an abuse. But they didn't have anybody to protect them, and so there are opportunities where people abuse.
So I've got really mixed
Alex.
feelings about this because part of this is it's a contract between two individuals, presumably that understand what their rights are. Maybe not always. Now, what's the difference between a house flipper that signs a contract, like we're just talking, and they actually close on it? So I just close on the property on day one, I sell it the next day. Yeah, there's some conveyance taxes and so forth. But other than that, I've avoided that idea that I've assigned my contract, so I've gotten around this provision, and we've still taken advantage of the homeowner the same way. They didn't get what their value was. I mean, to go to an extreme, we could say, listen, you can't sell your property until you list it with a realtor, and it goes on the MLS for at least 30 to 90 days, and
No,
we'll
we're
get
not
the
doing
best
that.
deal, and then we'll determine if you're making the best deal you should. So we're going to look out for you guys because you're not smart enough to do it yourself. I don't know. I got a real problem with them getting into. I don't want to see homeowners get screwed, but at the same time, there may be situations where it just makes sense for someone to unload a property. It's pre-foreclosure. There's some other economic issues going on, and it just makes sense for them to unload it. Somebody's walking in as a cash buyer and says, listen, I don't have to do financing. I can close in 7 days, 15 days, pick a number. And, you know, there could be legitimate reasons why someone would want to do that. And why should we get in the way of that happening? But I do understand the homeowner aspect of what you're saying. And, you know, we don't like to see that people get screwed. So I don't know. I can go either way on this one.
Yeah, in the direct private lending business, wholesalers don't really have very good reputation. And it's you know, like so many things, there are those who are, you know, above board, and there are those who go around basically just essentially taking options on properties and then seeing if they can raise the capital or find the buyer to to unload the property. When I was in direct private lending, I mean, generally the rule was the entity that executes the purchase agreement has to close. So, like Bob, you know, as you said, you know, we were kind of forcing the wholesaler to actually take title to the property and then figure out the resale, rather than keep us, the lender, you know, kind of hanging on for an extended period of time, you know, because sometimes they'll go 30, 45, 60 days without closing a property that they've wholesaled. And that could mean them finding the capital to close it, or them finding a buyer to step in and assume the contract.
Jim, how does this affect our association? Is there any win here or any lose if this goes one way or another, or can we just observe this?
Yeah. Well,
and
in the
then
past, we've observed, right? We
check back
haven't.
in? I mean, you're not helping builders by taking a position on this thing either way. You may be helping realtors, maybe remodelers. I think remodelers would rather have this capability in hand than not have it in hand, but I don't know.
Well, this guy is, you know, the gentleman who is joining our association he did say there are instances where, you know, raw land has been transacted this way, for, you know, maybe, you know, so you Chris would have purchased a property, you know, held it for a little while and realized you can't hold it anymore, that.
I could see that being exempt. We're talking about really protecting homeowners here. I mean,
Right.
it's a big difference, I think.
Mhm. So,
Well-
but Chris was asking about the effect on our industry and our members. There was an instance,
Yeah,
so-
I'll give you one example. I hate to throw out names, but everybody knows him. Luke Florian basically built his business over buying off-market houses. And most of them he keeps for himself, fixes them up and rehabs them and keeps them for rental, but he does flip units. He'll sell contracts. I mean, he's one of those guys that's advertising out there. I will buy your home. I'll buy homes that are vacant. I'll buy, you hear the stories. I'll buy homes that are in foreclosure. I'll buy homes where the tenant's not paying rent. I'll buy it from a hoarder. That's his business model, is to do that. Now, is he taking advantage of people? Some people would
No,
say
I
yes,
think, I
but
think the difference there, though, is the fact that you're getting a piece of paper and then selling the paper. You're not retaining the property. I think that.
and I
that-
think
as
Luke
a
does a
whole-
little of both of that. He will flip
Yeah.
houses. I don't know if he takes title and then sells them, or if he will sell the
Probably.
contracts. I don't know.
Yeah, Bob, I think that's, yeah, I mean, you're right. There could be a question there, but
Yeah.
there is a lot of predatory, wholesalers.
Yeah,
out there that
it's a business that's kind of, includes the very good operators and the very bad operators.
So why don't we do, I mean, this is an option, right? Is that I could submit very general testimony saying that, we're generally supportive of free markets, that, and I don't want to say who are we to impose on someone else's market or business plan or business model, but that there are, that we do feel like homeowners, there are valid reasons to have entities like wholesale transactors out there, but that we understand that this is a market rife with corruption or with
Yes.
near doer wells, whatever you want to call them. And
Predatory, yeah.
that we do want to protect unsuspecting homeowners, that there really should be disclosure, but we also don't want to see this option go away as a viable option for transactions of properties.
So
Yeah.
my question would be, do we keep both sides happy, or are we pissing both sides off? Because then maybe we sit it out, because I mean, there's
Yeah.
realtors on one side
Mhm.
and there's potential new members, I suppose, on the other. But to wade into this until we find out more, we
Yeah.
could just be weighing in where it doesn't really help our
Yeah.
Yeah, we
association.
can let somebody else protect those buyers. We don't need to be the ones protecting the buyers. That's why I asked about how
Yeah.
does it affect our home building industry?
Right.
I mean, it's not our job to necessarily be consumer protection for those people. Do I think that a 30-day disclosure is appropriate if they're gonna sell the contract rather than purchase themselves? Yeah,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
that's not our deal to put on the table or anything else. I just don't think we have good standing here.
All right.
The-
So
The other issue, Jim, with
Monitor the building.
disclosures, just one last thought. One problem with disclosures is the guys that are reputable, that are trying to do it right, would say, listen, I'm gonna buy the house real cheap from you, but we're gonna close in 7 days. You do have the right to get a hold of a realtor or get multiple bids and all that kind of good stuff and be upfront with them. But you know who's not gonna do that stuff? Is the unscrupulous guys. They're just gonna go in there and make the deal anyway. So
Right.
that form that you want presented doesn't get presented from those assholes.
I was just an example,
That
but
language.
Yeah.
So, have you really protected anybody? I don't know. Yeah, this is a tough one. I kind of go with Greg, is maybe we just sit this one out. I don't know.
All right. Yeah. You're muted there, Greg, but I'm sure we got it.
You're better when you're muted, Greg. Your point's well taken.
All right. We'll just monitor for now. And maybe when this gentleman becomes part of our association and wants to voice his opinion at GA, he can do that next year.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Jim, if
I
you don't have
don't-
anything else, I just have two real quick things that we didn't talk about early on. First, Home Building Industry Day, a week from Wednesday, the 12th. I think 8:30 to 11:30, if I got the time right, Jim?
Yeah, I think we moved it from 8 to 11:30 to
Maybe
give
8,
folks
okay.
time to have breakfast.
So I assume everybody's already gotten information about this. We'd love to see everybody up there and bring your friends and family. Be nice to have a good turnout, and hopefully we'll make it a really good event worth your time and effort. So hope to see
Yeah.
you there.
And for folks who are going and registering, we'll be reaching out to see if we can reach out to your local legislator for you to make connections and to hopefully have you guys after the event is over to go and meet with your local legislator if possible.
Jim, are you gonna put together a we support, we oppose list?
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's bigger than just this kind of stuff. It incorporates a lot of those other things like that savings account and stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
We'll have something really quite up to date, probably done the
Yeah.
night before, that we'll know what the hot issues are of the day.
And it'll be something that we can fit on one piece of paper. So it might not be, completely inclusive. What it'll have is the burning issues that we have real concern with or that we're strongly in support of.
Yeah, it's nice to have some you can support because they want to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, Homes for Connecticut being an example, and again, Jason Rojas's housing bill that we just talked about, the House Bill 7112, has some real great stuff on it. So, all right.
The one last thing I want to mention, although I don't think anybody here doesn't already know to do this, but if you're ever making announcements at your locals as far as what's going on at GA and you want information from us, get a hold of Jim the day or two before your meeting. We just got somebody reached out, actually Rob Michaud reached out earlier today, said I got I think it was a board meeting coming up for the local in Fairfield. I'd like to bring them back some information on where we are on issues. Just let us know what it is. Jim will put together a list. I personally asked for this before our central board because even though I'm doing this every day, I don't always know what the most important things are to pass on to the members. So I always reach out to Jim the day before, even sometimes the morning of, sorry, Jim, and say, what are the hot things that I should let everybody know about what we're working on and what the issues are and what they should be, paying attention to. So if you're involved in your local at any level, whether you want to talk at a board meeting, a membership meeting, and you want information just to present and let people know what's going on, reach out to us and we'll get that information to you.
Yeah, and one last pitch, I'm begging folks, if you can just write a short piece of testimony, submit it tonight or as early as you can tomorrow. The hearing is tomorrow. So
That's 7119.
That was 7119. And again, Chris, you should have something, the reminder email that you got today. If you scroll down, has all the template information and how to submit it. So if folks would just take a second and do that, I'd really appreciate it.
Take a quick peek, Jim, because I found another bill number embedded into that template, and it said to support it. So there might have been like a copy paste thing going on. So take a quick peek.
Thank you,
I
Johnny.
rewrote it anyways, but it seemed like there was some confusion there.
Yeah, thanks, Johnny. I apologize. I'd seen that over the weekend too. I didn't know which bill it was on, but there was one that had that, Jim. Just had a bad link or something. So
I'll take a look.
From the last email you just sent, Jim, the one that the link to the testimony template is what has it.
So that one's good, is what you're saying. Okay.
It's not good.
Or not good.
that's
The last one I
not
said was not good. Okay, I'll resend it. All right.
Okay.
I'll resend it right as soon as we hang up.
All right, guys, as always, thank you so much for all your time. I appreciate the effort. I know this is a big time out of your busy day, so thank you very much for getting involved.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
everyone.
guys.
We'll talk to you a week from today.
You bet. Have a great evening.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.